Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm creating some layered die cut Halloween cards using the Halloween City Holiday Decor die set. This is a companion die set to the City Holiday die that came out last fall. So we have a bunch of different Halloween decorations as well as a Happy Halloween sentiment set. So this press plate and die set can be used in both the Glimmer system as well as the BetterPress system. I'll be using it in the BetterPress system. I'm also going to be using the everyday windows for one of my cards. So I'm going to have one of my cards with the curved windows from the original City Holiday die set and another one with the rectangle windows from the everyday windows and curtains die set. So I'm going to start off by creating my sentiments. I'm only creating 2 cards, but I'm going to do all 4 sentiments so I can pick and choose once I have the cards created. The extra ones I'll just save with that press plate and die set. So next time I go to create with it, I might already have a sentiment done to use. I'm just using some hammer mill cardstock and I'm going to heat emboss my sentiments with some black embossing powder just to give it a little bit of extra texture. Now we're going to have a ton of texture already with the different layered die cuts for this, but I always love sentiments that are heat embossed. It tends to be my preference, so you may notice I tend to do my sentiments heat embossed more often than just plain ink because I just like that extra texture and I like the little bit of shine you get from that embossing powder. I'm using some super fine black embossing powder, and I did put some embossing powder tool on my cardstock before I went and did my ink on there because I wanted to make sure that that embossing powder was only going to stick to the Versamark ink on my pressed sentiments. Then I used my embossing tool to melt that powder and make sure that it's nice and cool, which I just cool it down for 5-10 seconds. It doesn't take too long before I go and match my dies. Once I have my dies matched, I used to use a piece of Best Ever Craft tape to tape that die in place. I want to make sure that that die is not going to move on me while I'm doing that die cutting. And those pieces of tape can be used multiple times. So I probably use them a good half a dozen times before they don't really stick too well and need to be tossed. But you can get a lot of use out of each one of those pieces of tape. So once I have all of them taped, I'm going to put it through my Platinum 6 machine and die cut them and have them set aside so that when I'm creating my 2 cards, I will have them ready to go, ready to grab for those cards. And then, like I said, save the extra ones. So they're really easy to do, and I love the fact that you can easily do multiple sentiments at one time and have them ready to go. So there are my 4 sentiments, and again, I'm only creating 2 cards, and we're doing them in a nice Halloween palette. So my buildings themselves are going to be gray tones, but I'm using some bright Halloween colors for some of the elements. So for this one here, I have the base of my building die cut out of fog cardstock. The shadow part of my windows are done out of anchor cardstock. These pumpkins here are die cut out of Peridot and Lilac cardstock for the detailed bits. The back or the solid part of that pumpkin is just black cardstock or raven cardstock. And then I added a little bit of extra texture to these die cuts by using some matte silver die cuts or silver cardstock for the spider webs. It just gives them a little bit of extra shine to it. My skull or my skeleton here is die cut out of brushed cardstock from the antique white treasured cardstock pack. I always love using the different textures from those treasured cardstock packs. It's an easy way to just get a little bit of a different finish on your die cuts very easily. They die cut beautifully. I've never had a problem at die cutting, even some detailed die cuts like this. I've never had a problem taking those pieces out. For my bats for this card, I have them die cut out of glossy cardstock from the Onyx mirror cardstock pack, and my cat is die cut out of velvet cardstock from an Adhesive Velvet so that has a nice fuzzy texture to it. I always find that just finding different cardstocks and different ways of adding extra texture to the cards really just takes them to the next level, and they're so easy to use. I'm gluing everything together with some Barely Art glue. I have it in a fine bottle, so it works well for little details like this window with all the really fine ledges to it. It also works for gluing the large pieces down to the building base. And you can hardly see it in the video, but when you die cut that base, it presses in where those windows are intended to go. So this base of the window is from, or of the building is from the City Holiday die. So that one has the curved windows. These ones are the windows from that Everyday Windows die set. So these ones are rectangle, but you can line up the bottom of those windows to make sure that they fit in place and that they're nice and evenly spaced. So I waited to put my windows together till I had my spider webs in them. I wanted to have them look like they were behind the details of those windows. You could, if you wanted, put the top of the window, the detail piece of the window on the shadow piece, and then put the spider web on top of that if you wanted. There's really no right or wrong. It's just personal preference. I wanted it to look like it was inside the window rather than outside. And I'm using that same liquid glue for gluing everything together. I use it for almost everything. This window or this spider web is just slightly wider than that window. So I just took my detail scissors and just trimmed off that extra little corner before adding the top piece to the window. And you can see that sometimes I will also put my acrylic block over those pieces. It just holds them nice and flat while they're drying and make sure that those pieces have contact with the cardstock underneath. And it also frees up my hands for working with other things as well. There's also some spooky eyes that I have die cut out of Peridot cardstock. So those are a nice vibrant green. So this one here has a lighter building with some brighter colors for some of the details. Obviously with Halloween, you can really have fun with the color combinations and you can just play around with it. There's also some ghosts in that Halloween City Holiday die set. I'll be using that with the next card that I'm creating. And I have those die cut out of vellum cardstock, but the one thing with vellum is it's really hard to hide the adhesive. So the way that I do that is I put my vellum onto score tape sheets before I die cut it so that it turns it into a vellum sticker. So then you don't see any adhesive. Once I have my windows, my doors, and that bottom window on, then I can start adding some of those extra details on top. So these are those bats that I die cut out of the Onyx mirror cardstock. So they have a nice glossy look to them. And it just, again, is a different texture from the regular cardstock. Regular cardstock has that matte finish, and sometimes just doing something with a different texture draws your eye to those little details. So for this one here, I did my pumpkins out of that lilac and that peridot, so it had a pop of color. I also wanted it to be different from the frames of the window as well as my door. I didn't want to have orange pumpkins with all of that orange there and have it kind of blend in. I wanted it just to stick out just a little bit more. So I'm putting this on an A2 card, so there's not a whole lot of area for my card base that is going to be, or for my background that's going to be visible. I'm just using some simple distress inks to do a lightly ink blended background, and I'm only doing it around the edges because that's all we're going to see. So for this first card here, I'm using some Twisted Citron on the bottom. I put a little bit of hickory smoke in some areas for a little bit of a misty sky, and then the rest of it is the Villainous Potion. So we have a purple sky behind it to go with those Halloween color scheme that we have on the building. I didn't trim this down at all, otherwise we see even less of that background. So I'm just gluing this to an A2 card base. It's going to cover that front. Now, if you wanted your background to show a little bit more, you could put this on a 5x7 card and you'd see more of the background. I wanted to see mostly that building. Another option would be to create a shaped card base with that building and not have a background to it at all. That would be a fun thing to do as well. The last step is adding our sentiment to that building. And then I thought it would be fun to make those spooky eyes have glossy dome dimension to them. So I just put a little bit of glossy accents on there. Another option would be to use some grit placed glow and then put it on the Peridot cardstock and let it dry before gluing them on, or before die cutting and gluing them on the building. And then when the lights are turned off, you'd have glowy eyes. That would be really fun too. It's something that I love doing for spooky Halloween cards as well. For the second building, I have the building itself die cut out of Anchor cardstock. So it's a nice dark gray. My window sills, ledges, frames are die cut out of that Onyx mirror cardstock, so it's got a nice glossy look to it. And I did the same cardstock for the door and the door frame. I liked the look of that. It almost looks like lacquer paint because of the difference in finish there. Like I did the first one, my spider webs there are some silver matte cardstock, so it has that silver color, but it's not really flashy. I wanted to make sure that we had a few different textures. So by having the glossy frames and having the matte silver for the spider webs, it just gives you two different finishes aside from our regular cardstock. So I typically for these buildings start at the bottom with that door and with that large window, and then I start to put in the smaller windows at the top. Now any of the windows that were just the frame and the base, or the background, the solid background, and the solid background there I did out of the Lilac cardstock. Now I just glued the frame to that base unless it had one of the spider webs in there, because I wanted the spider web, just like the last one, to be between those two pieces. Now for this first window here, it's really easy because we have a straight edge on the bottom of the window. For the second one, I want this spider web to be in the top where that curved edge is. So I glue that down first, hold it in place, and then I'm just going to use my scissors to trim around it so that it follows that curve. Another option would just be to put it on the edge of the building or the outside of the building if you wanted it to show up on that way. But I like it, the look of it in between the frame and that background. So once I have those two pieces together, I put it under the acrylic block so that it can dry nice and flat, and then we can start adding our pieces to our building. I would start with the bottom layer here, making sure that the die cut itself matches up with that little indent that gets pressed into there when you do the die cutting. And just like the last card with the rectangle windows, I still use the bottom ledge of the little indent to line up these windows as well. I want to make sure that all of those window ledges are all lined up and they look like they're all nice and straight. Then I also like to make sure that they're evenly spaced between the windows. I try to make it as uniform as possible. Once we have those windows in place, this building here, I did orange pumpkins. So I just used some carrot cardstock for the top part, raven cardstock for the background piece. I still use that velvet cardstock for the cat on here because I really love the look of that cat with that black velvet cardstock. And then last but not least, we're adding our ghosts. And these are the ones that I put that score tape onto my vellum before I die cut them. It just turns it into vellum stickers, and I know that I'm not going to see any of the adhesive by doing it this way. It's just a simple little trick, but it's a great one if you don't like to see your adhesive behind your vellum. Even vellum adhesive still shows whether it says it's going to or not. So this way I know it's not going to show. So just like my last one, I'm going to do a very, very simple background. This time I'm only using the hickory smoke and the villainous potion. You certainly could put some of that twisted citron on the bottom if you wanted, but because none of the die cuts in my building have that color, I just didn't want to incorporate it in the background. I thought it'd be a little bit off in the background. So I just did the gray on the bottom, the villainous potion around the edges on the top. It would also be fun to add some orange to the sky for this one for a little bit of a spooky Halloween sky if you wanted. Just don't want to layer too much of the orange and purple together because we don't want them to turn brown in the sky. But it would also incorporate those orange pumpkins. However, by just having a purple sky here, we have a nice pop of that orange on the front of the building. The last step here is to add our sentiment, and I typically will leave one of the windows fairly empty so that we can put our sentiment right on top of that. I wanted to have a little bit of sparkle on this card, so I added it to the upper layer of our orange pumpkins, and then I will let them dry. This is an iridescent stickle, so it doesn't have any color to it. It only has that iridescent glitter and then the glue for it. So once it's completely dry, we're still going to see all of that orange cardstock underneath there, but it's going to add that sparkle and that glitter texture to it. And it just gives it a fun, unique look and something just a little bit more celebratory for Halloween. Then we have our very first card here, and you'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. This one is definitely more vibrant in the color tones than the second card, and we have all of those different finishes from the different cardstocks. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.